Hello, everybody. I'm Gary Shockley, and I'm here with Cindy Weaver. I can't think of a better place to start and a better place to be than on this rainy central Pennsylvania day. So thank you for signing in and being a part of the journey with us. I have about an hour. If I take that whole amount of time, depends on how chatty I am, and also how chatty you are. So, speaking of chatty, if you'd like to chime in with a thought or a question, you can hit the chat or the Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen, and you can type those in. Cindy is sitting to my left and will inform me when she has received responses from you so that we can invite you into the conversation. And I understand you might be seeing a little box with my picture in it. Can you see that? Nope. So I guess maybe that wasn't enabled. That's better. You see what I look like on the screen. That's all you need. So we're going to continue to focus on today's webinar. This is the last webinar Wednesday, so they saved me for last. I'm not sure what that means, but here we go. I wanted to share a little bit about my story since I'm the new person on the team. I'm from this area. I grew up in West Hanover Township from the age of about 14. In 1973, the United Methodist Church participated in a joint initiative across the country with other denominations called Key 73, and maybe if you're as old as I am, you'll remember that. It was at that event when a group of lay folks came, lay witness mission, and shared their stories of faith. And I was a teenager, and I was one of two youth that attended that event. And after hearing their stories, and these were real people, these were not professional Christians, I found, as Wesley said, my heart was strangely warmed. And that night, I made a full commitment of my life to Christ. I've been a Christ believer and a God believer all of my life, but it was in 1973 that I made that commitment. It's interesting, I pulled up Key 73, an article back in 1973, where the United Methodist Reporter actually, if you read the paragraph, concluded that the drive of Key 73 produced nothing more than a giant yawn. I've always thought of myself as more than a giant yawn, but I'm a product of Key 73, so I know it at least produced one United Methodist pastor. And the proof of that is in my ordination photo. Bishop Felton May and a lot of folks from that time in my life. Now, when I reflect on this, at the age of 18, I was serving a Riverside Church in Harrisburg under a student appointment while I was at Messiah College. And it was an era in which the church was a lot like this, almost a Norman Rockwell postcard view of families with young children walking on a sunny day into the church. Churches were by and large populated with people of diverse age groups. It was the era of modernity in Christendom, which basically meant that people were embracing church as a part of life. It's what you did if you were a good American, if you were a good citizen, if you were a good person in this era from the 40s and 50s and on. We all know that something happened in the midst of that to change what churches look like on the inside and dramatically affect how churches function on the outside. There are a lot of reports and reviews and studies as to what has happened to lead us to what is now called a post-Christian era, where church attendance has declined dramatically. When I was at Riverside Church back in the late 70s, early 80s, I think at that point the unchurched population of that part of Harrisburg was 30%. And we thought that was enormous. And there's 30% of people that are not churched. We have work to do. That number is now 70%. In most of the communities where we are at work in the Susquehanna Conference, that statistic is holding up. About 70% of our neighbors around us are not engaged in a local church on a regular basis. Some would say that we have experienced a seismic shift in the role of church within our culture. We're a time when culture wrapped itself around the church, and the church was the center of society. We've become marginalized. In many ways, culture does not value us or what we bring. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. I'll do a workshop on it someday. The result is that we have this chasm that exists oftentimes between church and the communities around us. And maybe you can sense that as well. In what ways has your church experienced a seismic shift in the way that it has historically been connected with your own community? I just want you to just think about that for a moment. Phyllis Tickle, in her book, The Great Emergence, shared an insight that I've held with me. It makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make it any easier. But she said historically, every 500 years, the church has had to reinvent itself. She said every 500 years, the church has, as it were, a giant yard sale, where everything that the church has prized and valued and tended to so well is taken out into the streets and hauled away until the new thing emerges. Phyllis is now deceased. She's one of those prophets in the church. And she said we are in that period right now in Christianity in the United States. A giant yard sale has emerged. And so if you think about it, there are a lot of things that were part of the way we did church that we no longer have. There are a lot of things that we cherished that have diminished even in our own time. What are some of the things that your church has lost or had to give away in this time of seismic change and shifting? Just ponder that for a moment. One of the things you'll see driving around the countryside in North Carolina, where we lived prior to coming here in July, we had this vegetation called kudzu. Kudzu was an invasive species that was like a lot of invasive species brought here, planted, and just took over. And I've seen kudzu swallow whole cars. I've seen kudzu swallow houses. Given enough time, I think kudzu would swallow people. It serves no purpose other than to choke the growth of everything under it. Sometimes we think of the things that have happened in our culture as a giant kudzu that is swallowing us whole and diminishing who we are and what we do. I'd rather like to think about the opportunities we have as a church to be spiritual kudzu back at the world, where we are able to wrap ourselves around our culture and overwhelm it with a sense of God's grace and God's presence. But what are some of the cultural changes that have overwhelmed you? What is some of the kudzu that has come and threatened to overtake you? I do want to remind you that if you want to chat or send a question, you can use that chat or Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and I invite you to do that. Cindy will let me know when somebody has something to say, and then I'll pause and take advantage of that. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep moving. So I'm warning you. I'll just keep talking. In this time of change, where the world just seems to have shifted all around us, this is a time for focus. In the United Methodist Church in particular, this is the time not for us to lose heart or for us to take our eyes off the ball, so to speak, but to become increasingly focused on what it is God is calling us to do in this time and in this place. I love this saying enough that I put it on the board on my wall behind me that says, focus is finding a big yes and saying no 1,000 times. We're having to learn how to say no to a lot of good things. They may not necessarily be the right things at this time and place in our lives as Christians, as a church, and as an annual conference and a denomination. So let's begin by focusing on what we are about, the Susquehanna Conference. Our mission statement is to grow spiritual transformational leaders, equip vital congregations, and create new places for new people, connect with each other and the world, so that, alive in Christ, the Susquehanna Conference will embody the beloved community of disciple-making congregations. One of the things that I want to invite you to focus on are those two words, so that, because I'm going to encourage you to be thinking about when you are planning as a church to do things, to move in a certain direction, to do your calendaring, for you to ask the question of everything you are thinking about doing, why are we doing it? In other words, we want to do an ice cream social, add the word so that, and then answer it. So that what? How does your response to things and your desire to do things roll up to your own church's mission and vision statement? That's important in the economy of things. So even as an annual conference right now, as we're looking at initiatives and considering our cooperative work together, we have to ask ourselves, whatever we're doing so that this mission statement in front of us becomes a reality. Congregations are becoming more vital. New places are created for new people. Leaders are becoming spiritually transformational people in the world. And we're connecting one another as churches and as organizations, especially in United Methodism, so that we will embody a sense of beloved community of disciple-making congregations. Everything we do needs to answer so that. I hope that makes sense. In this time and place within our annual conference, I'm delighted that when I joined this team, especially at the conference center, that I joined a group of other energetic, compassionate, caring, committed disciples of Christ working on your behalf in this area. And so we have three main focus areas, as you saw in our mission statement: grow, equip, and connect. This is the office of equip. We have an office of connect and an office of grow. And already, since arriving here, these three offices are connecting and collaborating on some key initiatives that we think will make a difference in how we resource churches and equip people for vital ministry and connect them with one another in service to the world. I love this passage of scripture from 1 Corinthians 3. The one who plants and the one who waters works as a team with the same purpose. We work together as partners who belong to God. We value that sense of partnership here at our conference center. We really do see ourselves working as a team. Cindy and I see ourselves as working as a team. She often wonders, why do you include my name in things? It's because we're partners in ministry. And I should add, too, that Cindy and I are the staff persons at the conference center, but there are about a dozen people in our Equipping Vital Congregations team, clergy and laity alike, who are also at this work and are running in different directions in the annual conference, providing workshops and coaching and training. And I hope that some of you have had a chance to connect with them. We couldn't do it together. We couldn't do it unless we were willing and able to do it together. So we are the Equip team, equipping vital congregations and new places for new people. I want to spend a moment just talking about what that means. There are three primary areas that our work is focused on. One is revitalizing ministry. And that word revitalizing, to make vital again. Every church in its life, as we'll see in a moment, has different stages, different opportunities, different initiatives. So when we're meeting churches that sense that they're declining or maybe floundering or have lost a sense of purpose or direction, and maybe need some kind of help in re-engaging with their communities to find and build new relationships, that's all a part of revitalizing ministry. And so one of the things that we focus on is helping churches do that. I'll talk more specifically about that in a moment. The second thing that we're invested in through our bishop's initiative is fresh expressions. The bishop laid out the charge at annual conference that the desire is for every congregation in the Susquehanna Conference, about 840 of them, to have at least one fresh expression group that is up and running. Let me talk just a moment about fresh expressions. It's a fairly new thing to me. It's probably a new thing to you. It's a new thing to our country. Back in 2004, the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, decided that their current ways of doing church was not impacting culture. They needed to think about new fresh expressions for ministry. These were things that were not going to replace the church, but work alongside the church. And so Fresh Expressions is not a program, it's an intentional movement that has us reaching new people in our backyards, in our community spaces, in public arenas, in spaces that we haven't thought about utilizing as churches, for the purpose of helping people connect with one another, helping create safe spaces for people to talk about faith and ask and have answers to their questions in a non-threatening environment, to create opportunities for people at their own paces to begin to consider and commit themselves to and grow as disciples of Jesus. So Fresh Expressions they tend to be small groups, they tend to be affinity-based. People are gathered around common interests. They tend to be folks who are not churched, or they were churched at one point in their lives, but they're not keen on coming back to church just yet. And most of our Fresh Expressions groups are led by lay folks, which is exciting, because we have always been a lay-led, energized church as a denomination. And so this is another opportunity for lay people to add their gifts and their skills and their graces for ministry and their own energies in order to launch Fresh Expressions groups. These tend to be very inexpensive. They tend to be very experimental. They tend to be very easy to start up and very easy to keep going. So in our annual conference, Fresh Expressions groups that exist currently look like dinner churches. Imagine in your church space, but preferably outside your church space, there's an opportunity for folks to gather for dinner at a very common table, conversation, dialogue, those kinds of things, and then adding some kind of a very soft set worship experience, whether it's a guitar or singing a cappella, reading a passage of scripture, just sitting and reflecting on it, maybe some thoughts and conversations around it. That's it. That doesn't sound like much, but it's inviting people to have dinner together, which builds relationships. It's inviting people to consider the gospel. It's inviting people to consider Christ. It's inviting people to take the next step in their journey. So dinner church is a pretty big deal. We have congregations that are initiating kinds of rubber products, and then it evolved from that into other kinds of textiles, and then it actually became a factory that made pajamas. Did I just lose my picture? Well, I'm going to keep going. Larry will come if there's a problem, but I lost my monitor. I can't see where I am. So the pajama factory is one of those places where right now it's the newest iteration of its life. It's kind of a warehouse of all kinds of businesses and enterprises and social community where people gather together. There are artists, there are emerging artists, there's recreational kinds of things, an eclectic mix of folks who gather together for community. And one of our churches, it has a space in this that they're renting, and it's a chance to rub elbows with all the other businesses and people that are there and to begin to grow from that. We have a church right now that has a ministry that's extended into a Budget Inn hotel. And so they rent a space, and in that space, they serve food, they have worship, they have conversation, they have counseling. They're rubbing shoulders with people who are, for the most part, a transient population, poor or unable to provide for their own housing. And so what they're doing is they're using that venue as a way to, again, extend the church into a different population group. I'm going to take a moment because I've lost things on my side and I'm not sure how to recover it. So if you'll just bear with me for a moment, I'm going to see if I can get the gurus to come in and help. We are still looking for your questions too, your comments, your thoughts about things, or if you're aware of Fresh Expressions groups, anything like that, that would be helpful. Okay, give me a break here for a moment.
Can I just start your screen share again?
I don't know how to get out of that. I'm not sure what I'm doing here. This is why you employ younger people for this kind of purpose. Did it just go to sleep?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
There we go.
Let me get this box out of the way. All right. I think we're back. Thank you so much. See, when I was talking about team, this is what I was talking about. So, the other category, revitalizing ministries for existing churches, fresh expressions for existing churches, new church starts. And new church starts show up as things like multi-site campuses, a growing church that wants to extend ministry into a neighboring community and is able to do that through a variety of venues. Fresh expressions is also a form of new church starts. Vital mergers, all of those kinds of things. There's a lot that lines up under that. And so the purpose of it is to create new places for new people so that we extend the church in fresh and vital ways. And we're doing all of this so that vital churches create vital disciples of Jesus for the transformation of the world. If we're not doing that, then we need to stop what we're doing. So let's just talk, since we're equipping vital congregations, what is vital? What does that mean? The dictionary defines vital as of utmost importance, full of life and vigor. So when we talk about vital mergers, the question is of utmost importance to whom? Are we of utmost importance to ourselves? No. I think the Bible would help us to understand that we are of utmost importance to our communities, to our counties, to our states, to our nation and the world. The scripture says you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. Jesus said, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Think of these as concentric circles. Where you are sitting right now is Jerusalem. Your county you might think of as Judea, and as Samaria, and the state, and the entire world, and spiraling out from that. We are to be vital for the sake of all of that around us, not just to ourselves. So, thinking of that, if your church ceased to exist, would the community around you miss you? Would they even know you were gone? A fun thing to do some Sunday morning is to have some of your church members just go out to the community, stop at the gas station, walk along the streets, just stop and ask somebody, I'm looking for First United Methodist Church. Can you tell me where it is? Or can you tell me anything about it? As we're doing that, and as I'm doing that in some of your communities, what I hear is, I don't know where that church is, even if it's next door to the gas station I'm standing at. Worse yet, when you ask, do you know anything about the church, you'll find that very few people will know much about you. So how do we build bridges so that the community would miss us because we bring value? We are of utmost importance. How do we know when a church is vital? Well, the people inside are full of life and vigor. That's what it means to be vital. I did a workshop for United Methodist Men's Conference in North Carolina, and they asked me to do an hour-long presentation on what it means to be a vital church. And I did all my PowerPoint slides, and I did all this fancy stuff, and I just had it all worked out perfectly. And as I was standing up to speak, the Holy Spirit kind of nudged me. Don't you love when that happens? And I thought, I don't know that I need to say any of these things. And when I stood up, I said to the group, if you want to know what a vital congregation is, all I need to share with you right now is your church is only as vital as you are. Your church will be vital when you are vital. And you know, that was a God-inspired thought. And now as the director of equipping vital congregations, I understand when I'm talking to congregations, I'm not trying to change the church. I'm trying to help people within it begin to become more vital and to change in terms of who they are and how they behave in the world. So the question that I would ask you, as somebody interested in being a vital church is, what are you doing personally to be of utmost importance to your community and your world? How are you making a difference to the people around you? And secondly, what are you doing intentionally to get and stay close to God so that you are full of life and vigor, tending to your own soul, living who you are as a follower of Jesus in the world around you? If you want to be a vital church, these are the things you need to be focusing on. Now, the reality is that every church, just like every person, has a life cycle. When I think of my life, I'm getting very close to the right-hand side of this chart. I would say I'm maybe the guy in the green shirt. I'd like to be the guy behind him, but I'm the guy in the green shirt. My life has a cycle, and on this planet, it will come to an end. I will die, and I believe in the resurrection. But in this earthly world, I will cease to exist. One of the things that is true and hard for us to reconcile is that our churches, just like us as people, have life cycles. This chart can be made available to you if you want a copy. Email Cindy, evcoffice@susumc, and we will send it to you. Let me just talk about it for a moment. The life cycle of any organization, of any healthy organization, looks like this. I stylized this in particular for the church. It begins with launch or birth, and as you see it growing up to that scale, there's growth, there's sustained health, and then on the downside, there's maintenance and preservation, life support, and the other end of that is death. Oftentimes when I'm sharing this with folks, I'll get kind of a scared look on their faces, and I tell them, the Apostle Paul was the premier church planter in the New Testament. And every one of the churches that he planted no longer exists. You can't go there to worship there. And he was the premier church planter. Your church someday will have an end. We don't know when it'll be, but we do know what might cause it. And so as you're looking around this box, one of the things that shifts from the beginning of our journey and the growth of our church, the focus and energy mainly goes toward who is not here yet. Who do we need to be reaching for the kingdom? And so that's what drives the growth of a new church. They exist primarily for the external community around them. What happens as we become more established, as we become more comfortable, is the focus and energy shifts away from that startup external focus to mainly internal. There's a switch that happens where we begin to ask, what about those of us who are already here? What do we need the church to do to care for us, to tend to us, to help us to grow? So it moves from them to us, and we start finding equilibrium. These are not all bad things. Deep relationships with the congregation become important. I find that of value. It's more difficult as time goes on for us to meet and attract new people because we're a tight-knit group. And then we become more focused on the building and what it takes to maintain it, and policies and procedures and how to protect it, how to care for what we already have. Gradually we move into a period of preservation, which means we just want to preserve what we have and make it last long enough until we're gone. And so thoughts about, I don't know, that roof looks fine for the next 10 years, and I might be thinking I may only have 10 years left of my life, so the roof is not important to me. Well, if it's going to be important 20 years from now, we need to be tending to that, not just in terms of our own preservation as members of the church. But we tend to repeat our ministries. Systems become less flexible. Change becomes a threat to us. Memories and traditions become more central. Somebody recently said, and it made me pause for a moment, that when we begin to reminisce more about the past than we do dream about the future, the end is near. Eventually we move into church becoming a family chapel where we just care for one another, and then gradually we fall away. Where do you think your church might be on its life cycle as you think about that chart? Just take a moment to scan through it. where would you place an X along this line? This is not a judgment. And I use this, it's not being judgmental. It's being practical. Help me to understand where you see yourself.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
On vitalization.
Yes, we have a question on vitalization.
One is, how do you convince church members that vitality is not all about the number of people in church on Sunday morning?
How do you help people understand that vitality is not just about counting people in church on Sunday morning, but other things that are valuable? That's a great question. And we live in a numbers world. And you know, when you're filling out year-end reports, if this is coming from a pastor or a key layperson in the church, you know, we want to know what's your average worship attendance, your Sunday school class, how much money you spend on ministry, what are you giving to mission shares, how many small groups do you have? All of those things count because we count that which is important. But sometimes we can miss the things that are happening that are not being numbered in this. So what I would suggest is to value the numbers because they do indicate things. When worship attendance begins to decline, it can become a warning sign for us that maybe we're not building the kind of strong connections that people value in worship attendance. If giving begins to decline, it might be an opportunity for us to understand that in certain families, they've moved into a hardship. And so if we see a trend in giving change, it might be a pastoral care issue that we can just find out what's going on in their lives and how can we intervene. But helping people to understand always that the bulk of our ministry is outside of our walls. And so when we're engaged in meaningful ministries in our communities, helping people understand how valuable that is key. So do you have another question?
I have another one.
Okay.
This one is, a big part of my classes at undergrad centered around the idea of globalization and pluralism postmodern. Do you see that potentially being a significant difference in how the church is going to find a way to reinvent itself, or is that more common to previous reinvention periods?
Okay.
And that's a big, and they say we could tackle this one later.
I love that question. That's a question around a cup of coffee or something. I think you heard it as Cindy was reading that question. There's a lot in that. It's going to be hard for me to unpack it. But part of what is happening that's changing the nature of our churches is the globalization and pluralism, where social media has taken us worldwide. We're influenced by and are able to influence things that are happening on the other side of the world. What's happening to the church in China in an underground movement that's becoming actually more mainstream in some ways has a direct effect on what happens to us as a culture in our church relationships. I'm not going to deal much with this, but I do want to follow up, so whoever sent me that, send me an email so we can talk about it. The point is that everything is changing around us in the world. And if we're still doing and still trying to perpetuate church like we did in the 1950s and 60s, and I would say even in the 90s and 2000s, because the world is changing that quickly, we're getting further and further behind. We need to pay attention to what's happening to the world around us. The Apostle Paul was a master of stepping into culture and exegeting culture to be able to see what people were being influenced by and what was capturing their attention, and beginning to go and help them to see God in the midst of that. Not asking them to step over to where he was, but he stepped fully into where they were and unpack that stuff for them. And that's part of the work of the church. And it only happens when we're willing to build communities and relationships with the people around us. Thank you for those questions.
I do have one on fresh expressions.
Okay, let's hold the fresh expressions question because I am going to talk about that in just a moment again. Okay, but thank you for that. We won't forget because Cindy will not let me forget it. So one of the things that is true in this life cycle is there is a point at which, I won't say it's no return, but there's a point at which we need to be thinking about how do we keep ourselves from going down the slippery slope. The short answer is we need to create another bell curve. We do that by initiating new things. So churches that are engaged in fresh expressions, churches that are helping to launch new congregations, like Calvary United Methodist Church in Dillsburg and the Open Door. Calvary welcomed this young group of persons, young adults, to come and do a new thing within an old thing. And so they see themselves as one church with two expressions. So as this new church is growing in their midst, the older, and I don't mean older in terms of age, but more traditional church is also experiencing a renewed vibrancy. They're getting a new sense of life because they're doing this new thing. So the secret to this chart is to keep creating new things and be innovative in ministry and outreach. That's what keeps us from moving into maintenance and preservation mode. And we have a lot more we can talk about that. Again, chat or QA for your questions or any of your responses. So how do we, as the Equipping Vital congregations begin to have relationships with 840 different churches in our conference, when Cindy and I are sitting here and working in the office, and again, about a dozen people are on our Equipping Vital congregations team. One of the things that we're moving toward, this is going to be an experiment, as most things are in the church today. Everything you do that's new, you need to see it as an experiment and hold it with open hands. And if it fails, go, okay, not that. Let's try something else. Don't let it throw you. We are in an age of experimentation. So this is the acronym that I use for this new thing that we're doing. I call it AIR. And AIR has three components: assess, intervene, and reflect. Clever, huh? So let me just use your you go to the doctor's office, or emotionally or mentally or spiritually in other places. It becomes important to slow the process down enough so that when you yourself physically are not feeling well, meet with somebody who understands all of the different systems in your body to offer a diagnosis. You might say your arm is hurting and find out that it's not the thing that you think it is, a broken bone. It might be a pinched nerve. Well, the treatment for those are radically different. So in our assessment process, if you were to call, as we're moving forward, your call would be relayed to a member of our team. That person would return your call, and they would initiate an assessment. The first step is a phone call with you to talk about what you're seeing, why you're seeing it, what you think is going on, to follow up with a short assessment tool for you and other leaders in your inner circle congregation to fill out and to discuss together. This is just a snapshot of part of ours. As you are going through that assessment and as you're scoring and getting a sense of where things are, there will be a follow-up conversation with me or someone from my team. And at that point, we would begin to talk about interventions. Interventions are the best practice resources and processes and programs that we are aware of, or that we will find out that we could bring to bear in your situation, okay? So we've assessed, and now we're ready to think about what can we do to be helpful for this thing that is ailing you or troubling you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the interventions that we currently offer in our slate of things, and this is where I will come back and answer this question with fresh expressions. One is called the Small Church Checkup. Just as you would go to the doctor to find out how you're doing, hopefully you have an annual checkup every year. It's a good idea for churches from time to time when they're struggling, small churches in this case, a pastor and a lay team of folks to engage in this small church checkup process. It is an assessment. It's actually helping you to do a church health history. What's been going well for you? Where are you struggling? What do you need to be thinking about? There is a component in this for crucial conversations where you're able to study health in other places and what can we learn from those. That then moves to a treatment plan with very specific things that you ought to be focused on for this next step in your journey, going back to that life cycle. What can we do? What should we be looking at in order to maintain and continue vital health? Okay, so that's one intervention. Readiness 360 is another one. It's an assessment tool. You're going to hear assessments from us. They're important. This is another one that a percentage of your congregation and leaders would complete. And it really is helping to gauge 4 specific things. Your spiritual intensity. Is your congregation driven by its passion for Christ and driven by its passion to reach people for Christ? Missional alignment. Does what you do as a church flow from your values, flow from your understanding of biblical vision and mission? The third category is dynamic relationships, measuring how healthy and dynamic the relations are within the life of your church and how those relationships are being built on the outside of your church. And finally, the fourth component is cultural openness. Does your congregation exhibit a capacity for embracing people who are different from you? So we get a readout. You'll get a readout. I get a readout in the office. And from that, we're able to determine if you are ready to do a new thing. And if you're not, what area of focus should you be looking at in order to get ready to do that? That's the Readiness 360. New church starts, I've talked about already, multi-sites. Your church might be saying, are we ready to expand ministry in a new and vital way? Are we ready for other ways of launching new things to reach a new target group, new places for new people? Leadership development is always a part of what we do because we believe that in any project, leaders have to go first. Unless leaders are being developed in their spiritual discipleship, it's going to be very difficult to lead your congregation anywhere new. We talked about revitalization early on. We have specific processes, short-term and long-term, where someone will walk alongside you and lead your congregation in a process of finding new vitality. Vision and strategic planning. We call it the work of clarity. Who are we? Why are we? What are we? How are we going to behave? What are we going to do? What's most important now? Are key questions for churches that seem to be floundering a little bit, kind of lost their way. It's a great way to kind of get back on track with that. Fresh expressions. Okay, so we have a question about fresh expressions, and we're going to get to it now.
So the question is, a concern has been heard that people will worry it will replace the traditional church or be working against it. How do we make sure that Fresh Expressions doesn't become 2 separate groups at odds with each other? And how do we make sure that traditional church and Fresh Expressions are working in harmony? Okay,
those are great questions, and I hear them all the time. To be honest, it was the first question that I had when I heard about Fresh Expressions. Is it going to draw people away from our church or hinder what we're currently doing? The studies are showing that the people who are being reached by Fresh Expressions groups are not those who are coming to church. If the Fresh Expression group didn't exist, those folks still wouldn't come to your church. Think of it as another doorway or a passageway into the life of your congregation potentially. But the point of a Fresh Expressions group is not church membership. It's about persons coming to know Christ and growing in discipleship. We want them to reconnect with the existing church that launches Fresh Expressions because we know that they would derive a great deal from being in community, but that's not the ultimate purpose. The ultimate purpose is to extend ministry and discipleship outward. And so it can be disconcerting if you're looking at Fresh Expressions group as a way of revitalizing your church and growing your church. If that's your primary objective, you might be disappointed. If your primary objective is to extend ministry to help people meet Christ and follow Him in their lives, Fresh Expressions is a good chance of doing that. Will it compete, again, with your traditional church in what you're doing? Most likely it won't. The only challenge is going to be if you're building Fresh Expressions groups with your already churched people. Yes, it could be a competition. For example, if you start a dinner church and you populate dinner church with your churched people, and that dinner church is on Wednesday night, they may come to Wednesday night dinner church and not show up on Sunday morning because they've already done church once that week. And you know, the average church attender right now in our country, somebody who says I'm church, will attend worship once every 6 weeks. So if they come on a Wednesday night, they might not come on Sunday morning. But again, Fresh Expressions groups, ideally you're not designing them for the already churched people, but for those who are not involved in your congregation, those who are not necessarily Christ followers. It will be a competition if you set it up that way. So you have to be careful about that. Hannah Sledge, who is a member of our EVC team, is the point person for Fresh Expressions. She is our guru of Fresh Expressions, as is First United Methodist Church in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. We can direct you to them if you have further questions. Okay? All right, thank you for those questions. Single board governance is another one, where am I? What just popped up? I lost my place. There it is, mission and site. Every church in our annual conference has access to a huge database company that will help you to know who is around you, what they do, how much money they make, what they're energized by, what are their likes and dislikes, how likely are they people that we're going to be able to reach through our church and our outreach. So it's a database. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but almost everything that we're doing when we're engaged in resourcing a congregation, I go in and check on mission and sites. Cindy will pull reports for me or for you or other things we're doing so that we're understanding the community. It's hard to change the life of the church in an effective way unless we understand the community around it. If you're trying to do something that is not going to be attached to your community, it's not likely to succeed. So we have to know who lives here, what are they looking for, and what do we do now that we can build a bridge to them? What kind of Fresh Expressions can we launch? Single board governance or a simplified accountability structure is a big deal. It's a way of restructuring the leadership decision-making groups of your church from whatever configuration you have now to a team of 9 people who care for all of that. It's streamlining. It's a great thing to do if your structure is getting in the way of effective ministry. If you're spending way too much time in endless meetings and populating your meetings with all of the people who could be out doing ministry, and you're top-heavy, it's a great way to scale that back so that you're releasing people to ministry and you're able to make quicker decisions. I will tell you that simplified accountability structure is not going to turn the life of your church around on that chart that I showed you. It can facilitate things that will do that, but it is not going to revitalize your church. It's simply going to streamline the structure of your church. So when churches call us, and they do all the time, and say, we need to move toward a single board governance, again, we go back to assess to say, is that really your biggest concern? Most of the time it's not, and it's something else that we're dealing with. But it is an important piece, and there's a lot that we can do to help you with that. All of these things going forward will have a coaching component. If you call us for Readiness 360, Vision, Strategic Planning, Small Church Checkup, Revitalization, whatever it is we're doing, you are going to have a coach who will call you to initiate a conversation and talk about building a relationship with you so that that person can guide you through whatever intervention is going to be helpful for you, answer your questions, and be able to steer and navigate through the challenges that you might face. That's going to be a new thing that we add here. We do have coaching for certain projects, but going forward, everything that we do will have a coaching component. So we're building a very strong cadre or army of coaches who are going to help to be those folks on the field for us. You'll learn about that when you call about something. And the last part of AIR, so we assess, we intervene, we provide coaching, and then we reflect. How's it going? Are changes needed? And what's next? That becomes vitally important. If there are mid-course corrections, we need to make them before we get to the end of whatever process is initiated. If we start something with you and it's not the right thing, then we need to stop it and change course. That requires a relationship between our office and your congregation. Because in that relationship, we're going to be able to figure those things out and discern together through prayer and conversation what's going to be the next right answer, which is what we're striving for. So assess, intervene, and reflect. So I just want you to spend a moment reading this passage of scriptures from Isaiah 43:19. I want to suggest that in this moment that we're spending together, this is the Holy Spirit speaking to you as a representative of your church. Are you so busy in your life and in your ministry that you don't have time to see the new thing? Are you a person or a church that is wrapped in worry and fear to the point where you're nearly paralyzed? I want to suggest that fear is not a faithful response to whatever God is calling you to do. Worry is not a faithful response. Fear is not a faithful response. Seeing and hearing and listening are faithful responses. Are you able to see the new thing that God wants to do? It doesn't have to be big and splashy. It can be a very small step, but are you able to see it? And do you trust that in this season, in your life and in your church's life, that God is seeking to make a stream in whatever wilderness you find yourself standing in? This is the God we know and love and serve. I think this picture is one that deserves some reflection as well. I have no idea where it is. I found it. I like it. It's a church at a bridge, and it could be a church on the other side of this bridge. I have no idea how far it extends. But it's a church that's not surrounded by a moat. At least I don't think it is. I can't see a big pit dug around it. But it's on a bridge. The word priest in the New Testament in Koine Greek literally means bridge builder. Peter talks about we are a royal priesthood, and we are the priesthood of all believers. We are the bridge builders of our world, of our community. I think the most important thing in our work together in vital congregations is to remember vital means to be of utmost importance and full of life and vigor, so that we don't just have a nice friendly fellowship that makes us feel good about ourselves and fills us with all kinds of spiritual nourishment. As important as all that is, that's not the end. That's not the reason why Jesus called us into being. We are to be his hands and feet, his heart and his mouth and his eyes extended into the world by our careful bridge building. Building bridges to our neighbors, building bridges, that's easy for me to say, all around us. And I would add this, that for the longest time as we've been building bridges as churches, highways out into the neighborhoods, we've lived as though the expectation is that since the bridge is there, people will cross it to us. They'll now have a way to get to where we are. That may have worked for us for a long time, but it doesn't exist anymore. The bridge exists so that we have a way to cross over to people who are waiting and to be where they are. My friends, if we can figure out how to do that and do it consistently with integrity and with passion and love, wow. I think we can change the world. I think we can change the world. So we have a couple minutes left. If you have questions or comments, this would be a good time to do it. Otherwise, I just am grateful for you. Cindy and I are grateful for your participation today, but for your diligence and your resilience in the work that you do as a church. It matters. You matter. More than ever, the church matters. We are more like the first century in terms of Christianity than we have ever been before. And I think it's more exciting now than it ever has been. And there's more at stake now than maybe ever before. When we lived in a culture where people just were Christian because they grew up here and it was the right thing to do. Nowadays, to be a Christian and a disciple of Jesus takes commitment and courage and dedication. It's not an easy path, but it's what God calls us to. So my prayers are with you, and I ask that your prayers be with us as we continue in a partnership to make a difference as churches for Jesus Christ and for the sake of the world.
I
So,
did have a question.
oh, there is a question pop up. Good, we have a couple of minutes.
What have been some of the most exciting or creative fresh expressions you have seen?
Two that I know of that are connected to hotels and motels, where there are transient population groups. Some have started by taking a charcoal grill out and on the property of the motel, just cooking a dinner and inviting the guests there to come and be with them. And a lot of times we have people who live in these hotels and motels because they can't afford to rent a place. They don't have a good financial track record to get utilities. And so they're living in these extended stay places. And we don't even know they're around us. They're entire communities. And from that, conversations begin and relationships start. I think those have been the most exciting. Anytime we're able to do something and it's coupled with a human need, I think is most important. I'm less excited about fresh expressions where we're trying to entertain people, because there's too many other things and groups that entertain folks. I'm more excited about fresh expressions that cause us to build deep relationships with people, often painful ones, because we step into where other people exist and we see the difference that God makes. There's a church in Colorado that I was connected to when I pastored out there that once a week went out to the open park of the city of Denver and met all the transient population groups there and fed them sandwiches, but they set up a table and served communion. And the pastor there was astounded at how people in limited times or whatever they were into would often pass up a free meal and stand in line for communion because they wanted a connection with God. Whew, that's powerful. That's good stuff right there. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Okay. I don't know how this turns off when we're at the end of it. Maybe we just need to end, stop share. But thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to hearing from you. And again, you can contact us here at the Conference Center. The contact information is right now on the screen, phone number and email. Thank you again for joining us, and God bless you.